Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to VUX World, the Practical Voice Podcast. This episode of VUX World is brought to you by Speebly. Speebly lets you interact with a website with your voice. It's a little widget, you put it in the bottom of your website and people can interact with it with their voice, and it will even navigate you through the website based on the conversation. So if you ask it, show me something about, I don't know, what's your company all about, it might take you to your about page. It might say, for VUX World, play me a podcast on dialogue design, and it can bring up a page with a podcast on it about dialogue design. It's fantastic. Also, if you've got a Google Action or even an Alexa skill, if you're using Dialogflow, then all you do is point Dialogflow to Speebly, and you can actually interact with your Action or Alexa skill through Speebly, as long as you've got Dialogflow set up. It's absolutely fantastic. And if you're building voice apps for clients and you refer one of your clients to Speebly, then get your action set up on Speebly or any voice interaction set up on Speebly for your client, Speebly will pay you a percentage of the monthly revenue. So on the one hand, your client gets the skill or the action that you've built for them available on their website, or they get a voice interface as part of their website. The users of the website get access to the skill or the action, plus they get to have an experience on the website that they can't find anywhere else, interacting with the website via their voice, and you get paid. Everyone's a winner. Check out speebly.com/VUX to sign up. That's Speebly, SPEEBLY.com/VUX. Go check it out. Today's guest is James Vlahos. He is a journalist. He writes for Wired magazine. He also writes for the New York Times. If you've come across any articles on conversational computing on New York Times or on Wired, then you've probably come across James's work. His book, Talk to Me, How Voice Computing Will Transform the Way We Live, Work and Think, comes out today. Literally today. It hits shelves right this morning. And we're speaking to James today all about voice and all about his views on the voice world. We talk a little bit about the platform wars between Microsoft and Apple and Amazon and Google, and who's positioning to kind of take advantage of voice. We talk a lot about the history of voice computing, the history of machine learning and things like that. We talk a little bit about personality design. We talk a little bit about gender. We talk about living forever through a voice assistant. It's one of those episodes where we're taking a bit of a step back. We're getting a brand new perspective. We're looking at all of these challenges that exist and all of the observations that James has on conversational computing, and it's a really, really refreshing episode. You will be inspired. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, this is James Vlahos on VUX World.
VUX World. VUX World. VUX World. VUX World. Branding with the big faces. I love listening to it.
Kane Sims.
Kane Sims, the one and only.
Britain's finest, Mr. Kane Sims.
Dustin Coates.
I like it when you guys are together and talking about voice.
Without further ado,
Welcome to the show.
Great. So we have a good show. Kane, how are you doing today?
I'm very, very well, Dustin. Thank you. Super, super excited. Super excited. How are you?
Good. We have a great guest today, an author of a book he'll tell us all about voice. James Vlahos, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, James. So maybe tell us a little bit about who you are and about this book that you've written.
Okay, I'm an author, a journalist, and a fledgling voice interface designer. I am the writer of a book called Talk to Me, How Voice Computing Will Change the Way We Live, Work, and Think. And it is the definitive popular guide to everything that's happening in voice and what it means for the world.
And that comes out today, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And it's a project that's been 2.5 years in the making, going, I don't even know how far to say it goes back. It goes back to my childhood when I first played around with Eliza, the early chatbot in a science museum. It certainly was reactivated in 2015 when I wrote a piece for the New York Times Magazine about Hello Barbie, which was a Wi-Fi connected, voice-enabled version of the popular doll that you kids could talk to and talk back. So that was, weirdly enough, even though it was just a kind of a silly doll, it was a fairly advanced application of conversational AI with a lot of content that she could talk about. That seemed like a great way for me to start exploring this topic I'd long been interested in, of teaching computers to have natural conversations.
Great. And so 2.5 years, I bet you must be incredibly relieved to finally see this come out.
Yes, I like to tell people that the best kind of book is a done book. It is no small amount of effort to put a book together. And the good thing here was the worst thing for a writer is to feel like you don't have enough interesting things to say. And there's just so much going on in this field, from the history to the state of the art and the tech to the social ramifications of what this is going to mean for the world, or sort of the business battle that's happening between Apple and Amazon and Google. There's a ton to say. So the challenge is more like figuring out how to fit it all into one book.
Yeah, we're looking forward to digging into all of those. But first, you actually built a skill for your book as well. Is that right?
That is, yeah. It's currently on Alexa, and it will soon be on Assistant as well. But for Alexa, if you say "Open the voice computing book," then you'll pull up this skill. And the idea was, why getting to talk to an author of a book that you're interested in. You can think of it sort of like that feature on Amazon where you can click to peek inside the book. This is sort of a way to verbally peek inside the book, but you hear my actual voice. I can give you a synopsis, or I can read you an excerpt. There's even a voice computing quiz game that has just sort of fun facts about the book that the listener tries to guess. So just, making it an interactive way to get people into the book. And of course, in that this is a book all about conversational computing, it just seemed eminently appropriate that there should be a voice skill to promote it.
And you mentioned you're a fledgling voice application developer, but it sounds like you're a full-fledged voice application developer if you have that out. Did you use any tools to build that?
Yes, I did. So I used VoiceFlow, which is one of these interfaces that it's really designed for people like me who are not coders, but who nonetheless have some experience in conversation design and a sense for how the medium works. So if you haven't used it, it's one of these graphical interfaces where you can really see a visual map of just the flow of the conversation, where it's going to and where the branches are. You can obviously create custom intents and slots and all that kind of stuff. So it's really highly featured and yet fairly easy to use. I had a good time building it on that platform.
Kane, have you ever used VoiceFlow?
I've experimented with it a little bit. I think I've experimented with most of them, to be fair. VoiceFlow is pretty good. I think it used to be StoryFlow or something.
Storyline, I think, was the name of the company.
Yeah, Storyline is now turned to Invocable, and VoiceFlow, I think, was StoryFlow. I think it's Braden Ream who one of the founders of that. It's pretty good. It's very similar to what was Storyline, and very similar to Voice Apps as well. I don't know if you've come across Voice Apps. That's a pretty good one. And BotMock.
Yeah, I haven't tried that one yet. I'd done an earlier project, which we can talk about later if you want, using PullString, which is, in some ways offers more precision and control and, very detailed conversational flows, as well as detailed specification of linguistic rules. But that company, of course, has been acquired now by Apple. So came over to VoiceFlow and, like I say, really enjoyed the experience of building there.
Was this project that you were talking about the Dadbot?
That's correct, yeah.
Can you tell us a little more about what that project was?
Sure, absolutely. So this is a project that started in 2016 and started for pretty sad reasons. My father, who I was very close with, got a unexpected diagnosis of stage 4 lung cancer, so a terminal diagnosis. And in the family, we decided immediately we should do an oral history project with him and just get him to tell his life story and record it. And I did that, and it was just at the same time I was starting work on the book. It was right around the time that Pullstring came out as a platform that people could actually use in the public rather than just inside the company. And it just kind of all came together at once that, like, hey, instead of just having this recorded oral history project that you have to, go on your computer and play these big audio files or, read printed out transcript, what if I could turn the oral history into a chatbot, basically, an avatar of my father? So I spent many months building that, and it was accessible over Facebook Messenger, and you could send the dadbot a message and he would come back to you. Sometimes he would play audio as well, so it did have a voice component to it. And, it was both to tell his story, and I wanted it to kind of have his way of speaking and his, just a sense of his personality, which was just warm and humorous and very smart. So I was aiming to have all of that come across in the dadbot.
Yeah, you wrote something that I found really interesting and something that was a bit touching to me personally, where you said, how can a chatbot which exists to Gab express telling silence?
Yeah, this was at a particular part in the process. I was making the dadbot as my real dad was dying. And, so I thought about a lot about who he was. And one reason I thought he would actually be good, or it would translate at least to a degree for a chatbot, is that my dad is very articulate and very verbal. Like, he's all about words, loves words. So I thought, I can take something that has words, a chatbot, and there'll be a little essence of him. But that's obviously not even close to all that a person is. So sometimes it's when somebody doesn't say something to you that's meaningful, or obviously if they, reach out and touch you, or a look. So there's a lot in communication and in a relationship that obviously isn't expressed in words, and those types of things I couldn't get into the dadbot.
How did your dad feel about the project?
He was, I would call him indifferent. He, certainly approved of it. I asked his permission before I did it, but he was just focused on his own mortality and the fact that his death was essentially right around the corner. So, nothing really. I mean, I think if you'd handed him a lottery check for $6 million, he probably would have said, like, oh, okay, that's nice. He had sort of bigger things on his mind. But that said, he sort of intellectually appreciated what it was and liked the fact that it would help to keep some of his knowledge alive.
Is that where you see things going? I don't know if you've come across Brian Romilly before or not, but he talks.
I know Brian.
Yeah, so he talks a lot about this kind of thing, doesn't he? Where he's talking about kind of like almost like uploading the kind of personalities and family members or whatever into a kind of an assistant, so that they'll then kind of live forever. And in the book you talk about, there's a chapter on kind of immortals, and you kind of talk about this project in there. Is that kind of where you see some element of voice assistants heading? Is that we'll essentially be able to just kind of upload ourselves into a voice assistant of some description and then be available immortally forever?
I think long term that's the trend line, but I think I'm a somewhat more like practical in the present person, or at least a person who's kind of like what's happening in the next 1 to 3 years. And the tech now, as both of you I'm sure know, there isn't some process of just magically creating this fully robust conversational avatar of a person simply by vacuuming up their text messages and Facebook posts and other things they've written. Tech doesn't really work that way. So there's we're kind of in this weird phase where there's a lot of manual scripting and authoring and rules writing involved to create chatbots that work at all. So I'm not sure how we'll get there. I think there is a lot of potential for, if you're not necessarily trying to have a long multi-turn conversation with a voice bot, one that's, having context maintained over many turns, but rather it's sort of an information retrieval system. You're saying like, tell me a story about when you were in grade school, and you can pull up something from a bot. Like, computer science is quite good at this point at information retrieval. So I think there's a lot that can be done, even with present technology as it is now, to make really robust memorializing bots, basically.
Is DadBot still around?
I have sort of a local access version, but now that Pullstring has been acquired by Apple, they're not there anymore. And the DadBot lived on the servers. That's how, if you're going through Facebook Messenger to get to the DadBot, that's how you would do it. So unfortunately, mostly no is the answer. And that really gets to, I've been asked quite a bit by people like, is this a business? Can we really have virtual immortality? And one big stumbling block is how to make it immortal. If any company that's doing this is, for whether it's a startup or it's Google, how do you know that company is going to be around 5, 10, 20 years in the future? And if they go away, what happens to the bot?
Yeah, that is a challenge. Even if you're having something, locally, that still has to be maintained. Either the device has to be maintained, or it has to maintain consistency with any new operating systems as well. So that's an interesting thought.
Yeah, and it's funny because, you can compare something like the DadBot to an earlier technology that preserves someone like, photos in an album, and say like, oh, it's obviously much more advanced, it's much more interactive, but I've got decades old photos in boxes at home. I'm not sure that we'll have access to software that's 50 years old in the future.
A big takeaway I got from your book was that this artificially intelligent speech has always seemed to have been inevitable. But there were many times when it felt that way in the short term and just didn't arrive. Thinking about things like automata from the 19th century, voice toys, even early conversational games. Is this time any different?
Well, we're certainly a lot further along than we were when you referred to those 19th century inventions, and they had bellows for lungs, and they had little bagpipe reeds for vocal cords, and rubber lips. So that was just in a very primitive fashion, synthesizing the sounds of speech. But you're also right that there's been a historical tendency to underestimate how difficult it is to make a computer talk. And I think one of the problems is that you can put out these simulations that to an outside viewer seem more advanced than they actually are. There are a lot of cheats, and you can cheat in demos by having someone interact with a voice system who already knows exactly what the system can say. So they speak to it completely correctly. They kind of serve it up pitches it can hit, and the system looks great. But then that gives the public the idea that like, oh, this is right around the corner. And movies, of course, and television are a big problem as well. We've been watching these things literally for decades, where robots talk just like people do. So the expectation is so high in the public, and we also have really high standards. When a computer starts to act like a person, we nail it. We criticize it when it doesn't live up to being fully human intelligence, and we're really still very far from that. So I'm sort of circling around your question here, but at very least, you could say that the computer scientists today, they have a good appreciation of the complexities. They're not underestimating it. They've been able to divide the problem into lots of component parts, whether it's natural language understanding or speech synthesis, like each kind of step in the chain to making it happen. And we're seeing a lot of progress in a lot of these areas. So I think it is different, and at the same time, I don't think anybody should be holding their breath that we're going to have perfect voice AI in 2 years.
On that note, you mentioned that when a bot seems really human, if it's not behaving exactly like we expect it to, we ding it. Are there approaches that the big players, or even people like Kane and myself, can build into our voice experiences to sort of combat against that?
Well, it's all about fallback recovery. Obviously, like what happens when somebody says something to the system that's out of bounds, and just being able to to quickly point out, like, oh, I can't go there. Like this system isn't capable of that. For me, both with the dadbot especially, the very first time you chat with the dadbot, he makes a joke about how he's only somewhat smarter than a toaster. So just kind of immediately not trying to be more than you actually are. And I think I see this sometimes with, Siri's responses or the assistant's responses, where you just kind of quickly draw the line, like, that's not a place where I can play. And I think people get it pretty quickly if you draw those lines.
How important is the concept of like personification? You speak a little bit in the book around the history of like giving Alexa a personality and giving Siri a personality, and Cortana and Alexa, Google Assistant, they all have this personality, which is obviously, it's fine for the big platforms, but for the people building on the big platforms, or just for voice in general, how important is it that these things have a personality?
I'm in the camp that thinks it's important, just because if you're not going to have a personality, like if you're just going to be efficient, then maybe you should be using a visual-based interface or a text-based one. Like if you're going to voice, one of the things you can do is have warmth and empathy and humor, and you can do a lot in that medium that you can't do in the other ones. So why not leverage that, is my feeling. But it is, conversely, it's sort of dangerous to play with, because having those, I noticed this with the dadbot too, when sometimes he says something that's very clever or very funny. I've just lifted my father's words and used them in the dadbot, and then again that gets to that setting false expectations, like, oh, if he could say that, this computer must be really smart, and then the very next conversational turn you trip up and fail. But on balance, I say go for it, but just be a little bit careful.
Something interesting that you talk about in the book, and we're certainly not there yet, but perhaps we'll be there in a decade or so, is that these bots might actually supplant human connection a little bit.
Yeah, it's a controversial, worrying thought, and there's not a lot of research into this yet. There's one interesting study I saw that demonstrated that after people had interacted with a virtual assistant, that they were less likely to seek out other forms of social contact with people right afterward. But it was a small study, and I haven't seen much research on that. So we're guessing. But, could happen. It just could happen if you can get what you need. I mean, in the same way you could argue sometimes if people didn't have TV in their homes, maybe they would go out to parks more often, or they go do things. Sometimes you want a voice, you want some sense of companionship, and you'll take what you can get. So it actually does seem to me like a genuine danger, or at least something worth being very aware of, that as voice bots with personas become better, are we going to sort of hole up with them at the expense of other types of contact?
And I think one of the interesting implication, perhaps, as you mentioned in the book, is that you've got these, 5 or so companies that are really competing to be the voice platform, almost the AOL of voice, if you think of it that way. Where do you think those stand today? Who's best positioned for the mid and long term?
Well, let's see. So Apple with Siri, people within the voice world, I don't think I'm surprising anyone when I say that Siri kind of catches the most flack from people. And some of that comes from genuine problems with the product, but a lot of it I think comes from Siri having been first. So when the technology was less mature, Siri was the first thing that people tried, and they didn't have a great experience. So there's the perception in many ways that Siri is behind. I don't think it's totally accurate, but there's the perception there. There's also, the fact that Siri or Apple obviously doesn't have a great footprint in the home space yet, the way that Amazon and Google do. But on the other hand, there are a lot more iPhones out there than there are Alexa or the Echoes, for instance. So I would not rule out Apple by any means yet. That said, it does feel like Amazon and Google are out front. And in the book, what I write about a lot is not so much who has the better technology per se, but who's got more immediate ways to make money from voice, because that obviously help determine who the winner is in this. And I write that Google has some challenges because they are, they're an advertising company, and that's how they've made all of their loot. And advertising doesn't work well in the voice medium. It doesn't even really exist yet, and people are waiting to figure out how that's going to happen. So I just got to imagine that there's angst over this issue. And I noticed in my interviews when I was talking to people at Google, when you bring up how does voice affect search? How does voice affect advertising? That's often when I get the reply from the spokesperson, we're not going to talk about that, or we've said all that we're going to say on that subject, which is nothing. So that kind of signals to me that they're wary. Amazon's in better shape because they haven't existed to advertise. They've existed to sell us stuff, and this becomes our new portal, and the place where you search for information is also the portal to which you buy things. They're just kind of sitting in a sweet spot. So this is hardly a controversial or surprising opinion, but it feels to me like Amazon's got at least a narrow lead in voice overall.
Is that the primary measure of success then, in your opinion? Is the assistant's ability to generate revenue for the company? Is that kind of so for example, if the assistant is adding value and being helpful and people are engaging with it a lot, is that enough for someone for a company like Amazon, who might get sales elsewhere from the fact that this person now trusts Amazon more because the Echo or Alexa helps them out every day? I suppose what I'm getting at is the primary measure of the voice assistant the ability for it to generate revenue, or the ability for it to provide some kind of value or assistance to people?
Well, generating revenue for the parent company certainly isn't the metric of users. Like for them, it's all about what works best and what do they enjoy interacting with. So I guess when I bring that up, I'm just thinking long term, like where does this go? But I think you're getting at something very true, which is, right now the companies just want you to love their assistant the best, and I really don't think they've totally figured out how they're going to monetize the voice space, but are just feeling confident. They're like, we are going to figure this out. If we're the dominant voice platform, the spoils will come to us. We will be rewarded. So, they're not rushing in on advertising. They're not rushing in on sponsored results, because the last thing they want to do is alienate users at a time when they're still just trying to befriend the user and be useful.
You mentioned a couple of big players as well, Facebook and Microsoft. They're sort of on the edges today. Do you see even just a couple of years down the line that they're going to still be investing in this space?
Microsoft has put a lot of resources into Cortana. They talk to the press a lot about Cortana. I think they're proud of Cortana. They've obviously had to pivot and been pivoting to Cortana being more, just a voice interface to Microsoft's business products and services, rather than this, all-purpose virtual assistant. I think there was a time when maybe they were imagining like it's a new game now, and voice hasn't yet been settled. So let's go in hard and see what we can do. But now it does seem like they're saying like, okay, we're not trying to win overall, but we're trying to win on this being a good workplace utility. That's certainly my impression of what's going on. And Facebook, I have to say that of all of the big tech companies, when I was reporting the book, I had the hardest time putting my finger on just what it is that they are trying to do, because, they had that M assistant experiment, but then that was shuttered and they took their learnings from that. They've now come out with a device with a screen, but it uses Alexa. Like, they haven't seemed to come rushing in to the voice space, but they're interested in it. They have some very top researchers in the field working on it. So I've always gotten the sense that they're just kind of, biding their time, developing some stuff inside, and then seeing when the time is right to make a play.
Does it need to be a play in that respect? So from Facebook's perspective, so Amazon have Alexa, which is like a platform that you can build on top of. You can build skills on there and stuff like that. Google Assistant is kind of fairly similar. Cortana, similar still. They're kind of like platforms that have been put out there that you can then build on top of. How are you looking at Facebook from a perspective of they are potentially trying to rival that platform, that voice assistant platform, or is it a case of them just building a voice front end to Facebook services, similar to how you kind of explained of Microsoft building a front end to the Microsoft kind of platform? Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. And it might be that it's just a way in, and just a thought, like however the world wants to access computing, we want to be there. Like we want to meet them there. So obviously, like a company from 20 years ago, they're like, oh, we need a website because people are going to be looking for us on the web. You could obviously say the same is true with voice. Like if people are coming through the voice channel, we got to know how to work there. So I think you're right about that. Then and this idea is a little bit old now, but back in 2016, Facebook seemed big into the idea that they were going to be, the WeChat of the West, and everybody was going to live inside of a messaging platform rather than going out to an internet browser. And as such, companies would very much want to have bots, conversational bots that could work in there too, so people could interface with them. And I don't think that idea is dead. They've certainly backed off of that a ways, but that's another area. And then the final one, and this is just pure speculation on my part. I have no backing from anyone at Facebook on this, but I've always wondered if they are thinking about helping users to ultimately have avatars of themselves for when they're not online. Like, I've got the virtual James Vlahos that's making conversation with me, with people out there, even when I'm not, hooked in myself.
Duplex for Facebook.
Yeah, in a social setting, and that it's modeling my persona, or my persona at least as I want to present it to the world.
How are things different in the voice ecosystem today compared to when you started this 2.5 years ago?
Well, one big change is that people are not talking about bots and text-based experiences nearly as much as they were, 2 years ago, where people were kind of talking about both sides of the coin, voice things and text-based things. Everybody now seems to be voice. So that's the main thing. Amazon and Google have just become ever more forward about their ambitions. Like, this is big. We're going big into it. We want to dominate this. We're planting our stake in the ground. They've just become more emphatic about that. And even things like, seeing, Google Assistant commercials or Amazon commercials during the Super Bowl. Like, they're going fully mainstream with it. So maybe that's the difference there. The tech itself, frankly, it seems like there's more of it. There's more skills. There's more actions. I don't know that I've seen, a massive improvement in the quality of what's out there. And I was just looking at an interesting article this morning talking about how you still can't point to just the breakout hits of the voice space. Not that there haven't been great things that people have built, but nothing that has just absolutely caught the public by storm. The way that, this is the new iPhone scale of things.
One of the things that I think is really interesting in your book and really speaks well for it is you use some very interesting mental models to present more technical topics. And this is something that has been weaving through our conversation here as well. Do you think that the layperson can understand what's happening conceptually underneath everything? Or do you think this is just something that is going to be far too complex and people go, it's just magic?
I don't know. I certainly had this ambition with the book, and the middle third of the book in particular, that to demystify this process of you say something to a virtual assistant and then a response comes back. And people really lay public has no idea how this works. They have no idea how intricate and complicated and multifaceted the process is. So, I got really, I'm not a technical person, but I'm a veteran science and technology journalist. So I'm sort of used to getting inside of complicated topics, trying to really understand them, reading a ton of papers, talking to a ton of experts, and then kind of coming back to the other side and trying to explain things in a way that just, people that I'm going out to dinner with or whatever, hanging out with, that I can explain to them. And I don't know, I think I think you have to be interested. Like if you have no interest in this topic, I'm probably not going to, take you from 0 to 60 on it. But if you have some interest and some attention, like I just try and break it down into parts such that it's understandable and fun too. Like it's kind of neat to see, both sort of what makes it hard and what makes it work when it does.
How do you keep up with everything that's going on in voice? This is something that Kane and I chat about a lot. Is it seems like something new is coming out all the time. Some of it may be noise, but a lot of it's quite interesting too. How do you stay on top of all of it?
I've been trying to solve that problem for 2.5 years, and I don't know that I totally have. And it feels like new. This is a sign of the interest in this technology, but sort of new sources and new things are popping up all the time. And what I found, I have everything that you would expect. I have Google News alerts set up on all of the companies and subjects I'm tracking. I follow a lot of people on Twitter who are big in this space. And kind of what I've found is even if you're not 100% perfect in checking your Twitter, if you're not 100% perfect in reading your articles, it'll come across because the big stuff everybody starts talking about all at once. So it's hard to totally miss what's happening, any big development.
Kane, do you have any other questions?
There was one thing in the book which I found quite interesting. Well, there was plenty of things in there that I found interesting, but one thing but one thing we haven't talked about, which it's pertinent because I saw something the other day. In fact, it was I can play you it now actually if I can get this working. It's the concept of giving a voice assistant a gender, and how you kind of, regardless of what you try and do, it ends up having a gender. And all the big companies have got, largely female voices. Cortana, Siri, although you can turn Siri onto a male voice, and I think you can turn Google Assistant onto a male voice, but the standard one is a female. Alexa is the female voice, and then we've spoke a little bit about personas and personalities, and the voice gives part of the assistant part of its personality, so to speak, and with things like equality in general being a big consideration for everybody these days. You were kind of talking about the decision making in terms of how to give an assistant a kind of agenda, and I just wanted to show you this. I don't know if you've come across this thing called Meet Q, genderlessvoice.com.
Yeah, I was just reading about this week.
Yeah, so I've got a little clip, and for those listening at home, here's a little clip of what is intended to be a genderless voice for a voice assistant. So I'm going to play a little clip, and then it'll be interesting to get your thoughts on it, James, and see what you think based on the stuff that you've written about it in the book. So here's a little clip.
Hi, I'm Q, the world's first genderless voice assistant. Think of me like Siri or Alexa, but neither male nor female. I'm created for a future where we are no longer defined by gender, but rather how we define ourselves. My voice was recorded by people who neither identify as male nor female, and then altered to sound gender neutral, putting my voice between 145 and 175 Hz, a range defined by audio researchers. But for me to become a third option for voice assistants, I need your help. Share my voice with Apple, Amazon, Google, and Microsoft. And together we can ensure that technology recognizes us all.
So that's Q. What are your thoughts on that, James?
Interesting. Well, that voice read female to me, but that's just one person's subjective opinion. I know they did a lot of research into that. It's a fascinating discussion because, it's generally seen as being a little sexist, obviously, that the default voice should be female because women have been relegated to assistant jobs for much of the past century. So to just replicate that model in the digital assistant world is sexist. And, you know, it's funny, I knew all about this topic. I wanted to research it for the book, and just at conferences and talking to people in the field, people will say, well, you know, users tend to prefer female voices. And they just assert this like it's a known truth. So I went looking for the research that actually supports that finding, and I couldn't find it. I couldn't find it in the academic papers at all. I found sort of really not many studies at all, and the ones I did find were fairly ambiguous. So I'm not saying that these people have been lying to me. I just suspect that the research that's being referred to is internal research done by Microsoft or Amazon or Apple or whoever it is on what users tend to prefer. But I like that companies like the one you cited are sort of pushing back on that. And yeah, it's not something that should be blindly done, assuming that a female voice is the right one to have.
What do you think of that, Dustin? That voice?
It's interesting that, James, you said it sounded very like a female voice, because I saw on Twitter earlier today, someone goes, that's obviously a guy. So it seems like the duck rabbit of sorts, or not to bring I'm going to bring it back up, but the blue black dress of however.
Oh, right.
Yeah, no, it's interesting that you mentioned the research and you couldn't find the research. It seems so much that startups and tech, it's just a bunch of people following a bunch of other people. I read recently that 50% of searches will be by voice in 2020 is actually a completely taken out of quote context. So it's this kind of thing where we hear something that sounds interesting and we go, okay, I will do it that way.
Yeah. If you hear something interesting, you repeat it before you check it, unfortunately.
You put it on a conference slide in big letters, and that's when all the cameras come out too.
Exactly.
So, James, we will share the link to the book in the show notes, but where can people find you? Where can people find you online?
Yeah, on Twitter, I'm at James Vlahos. That's Vlahos. The book Talk to Me is on Amazon and other online sellers, as well as physical bookstores. And if you want a preview of the book, you can say to Alexa, open the voice computing book, and that will trigger the skill.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. Thanks so much for...
You're welcome. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Fantastic. Cheers, James. Appreciate that.
Cool.
That was James Vlahos. Thank you, James, for joining us on the podcast, and thank you, Dustin, for taking the reins on that one. It's such an interesting guy, James, honestly, and the book is phenomenal. We were speaking just after the podcast there about who is the book for, and the way James described it, it was for anyone who is interested in tech, and it's not necessarily something that he's positioning specifically for those in the voice industry, but I read it and it is enlightening. There's the whole history behind Alexa, the history behind how Siri was created and formed, you know, what happened to Siri after Apple acquired it, and why maybe perhaps it's not reaching the heights that we would want it to. There's stories in there around the history around machine learning and natural language understanding and where it all come from, and the examples of the very first computer generated speech. And then it gets into, where's it all going? Is the voice assistant going to be the kind of oracle? Are we all going to kind of live forever on there? A bit of future casting and stuff like that. It is such an interesting book, so definitely I'd check it out. It's unbelievable. The links will be in the show notes. Do check it out. Thank you so much, James, for joining us. Amazing chat. Thank you, Dustin, again. And as always, boys and girls, thank you all for listening. Until next time, see you later.